and I'm part of the adult programming team at the Halton Hills Public Library. Today we're going to learn about preserving herbs and other fun stuff as we welcome members of the Georgetown Horticultural Society here to teach us about this. I'm going to welcome Lil and Diana to show us all about herb preserving. This is part of our One Book, One Halton Hills programming. In our one book this year, Recipe for a Perfect Wife, the main character, Nellie, is an avid gardener and is very well versed in the use of herbs. We're also presenting this as part of our Culture Days events for 2020. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Diana and I are so pleased to be here today in this day of social distancing, and although we are good friends, we are staying far apart. Look at these beautiful lush herbs. First thing I'd like to do is thank D&G Greenhouses down on 8th Line for providing these for us to look at today and play with and show you how to do things with. What are herbs?
Well, herbs, they're a group of plants, and they have aromatic properties, they have taste and savory properties, and we've used them over the millennium for medicines, for food, for flavoring food, for fragrance, for dyes, to dye fabrics and so on, and for decoration. And here's the question that everybody's always asking: is a herb different from a spice? And the answer is that it only matters for culinary purposes. So you don't have a spice rack is something that you use for cooking, all right? But you don't have a spice rack for medicinal plants. You see, so you only use them, and they tend to be, the spices tend to be from the seeds of plants. They tend to be more exotic, or at least historically have been more exotic. They've come from sort of far-flung places. But in those places where they come from, like Malaya and India and China, they're probably considered herbs. And that is, so there's no big difference, and you're not going to be wrong in calling one thing, another. Herbs tend to be, all right, from what we know of herbs, they tend to be the leafy bits, the stems, and the leafy bits of a plant, as opposed to any other part of the plant. And then you come across saffron. Now, is saffron a herb, or is saffron a spice? Because it comes from crocuses, and it is the reproductive parts of a crocus, the stigmas of crocuses. And so it doesn't fill any of the other criteria for being called a spice, but I'm guaranteeing most people would consider it a spice, although in theory one assumes it's a herb.
And because it comes from the crocus, there's just, you know what your little crocuses look like in the spring. There's just these little stigmas in the middle. It takes a lot of that stuff to make a gram of saffron, which is one of the more expensive herb spices in the world. Herbs spread all around the world. Italian food, pasta with meat sauce, tomato meat sauce. No. That's new.
Yes. No pasta. That came with Marco Polo.
The pasta came from China.
Right.
The tomatoes came from the New World. And the Italians put them together.
And basil, and to making pesto, it came from India. So nothing was sort of native to Italy. And if you go back to the Romans, what the Romans were spreading around the world and around Europe and the Near East was a very different cuisine to what we would consider Italian today.
Chilies from Thai
Yeah.
food. They didn't arrive in Thailand
Yeah.
until after Christopher Columbus.
Yeah. And chilies add the heat to all kinds of cuisines, from Indian curries and so on. So what did people in India eat before chilies arrived on their doorstep? One wonders how the cuisines have hugely changed, and even our own cuisine from what our pioneers, sort of ancestors, actually cooked and ate is very different to what we have today, where we've adopted all kinds of flavors and herbs and spices from all around the world as the immigrant groups have arrived in this country.
Don't even have to go back that far.
No.
There's a huge difference between the way I cook and the way my mother cooked. Now, herbs have been used for millennia for medicinal purposes. Here's my 81 milligram aspirin, which comes from the white willow. But the indigenous people here knew about this long before we did, and used the willow bark to help heal. Echinacea, pretty flower that we grow and love, and there are so many wonderful varieties nowadays. But echinacea helps build your immune system. And this one says, super strength, supportive therapy in the treatment of upper respiratory tract infections. Well, there you go. You know, many of the medicines, valerian, for example, is used as a sleep aid. Feverfew, well, the name says it, doesn't it? Feverfew.
Yeah.
And then there are things like, the autumn crocus. You know, the one that they're often called naked ladies.
That's right. Yeah.
That comes, they have leaves all spring, leaves disappear, go away, it looks like there's nothing there. And right now, they've popped up through the ground and it's just a stem with
The
a flower
flowers,
on it.
the flowers in the fall without the foliage.
No
the
foliage
in
at all.
the spring without the flowers.
And
so it's a strange bulb.
that's used as a treatment for gout.
Yeah. And of
Bob-
course the opiates.
Yeah.
We get into the
Yes, and there's the
opium
opiates.
hobbits. Yes.
And then there's foxglove.
Yeah. Digitalis.
Yes.
Yeah, for treatment of heart conditions, etc.
Yep.
Yeah. So how many? It said that nearly a quarter of all of our pharmaceuticals today are plant-based, or were plant-based, because what they do, because it's not easy to totally defoliate a forest or something, or not wise, is that they copy it chemically. But the base chemicals they come from a plant, and so very important, historically speaking, especially in medicine.
Mm-hmm. Now herbs, they're used all around the world. Every culture uses them to spice up their food. And there we go again. You see, we're using the word herbs and spice in the same sentence. And that's the way our world is.
Yes.
There are things like parsley, there's thyme, there's spearmint, there's oregano, rosemary. I have to tell you, too bad that there isn't an odor thingy that goes through the camera, because it smells wonderful up here, doesn't it?
Oh yes. Yeah. And as we were sort of saying, for flavor and the different culinary purposes that we use them, it's amazing. Everything from strewing herbs. Now we don't use it so much these days, because I guess especially during times of COVID, we've disinfected absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But it used to be that there were a lot of nasty smells around in the average household, and a lot of insects and so on. And so they would take certain herbs and they would literally throw them around the floor to deter insects and to make the place smell nice. And now we no longer use strewing herbs, but we still grow them in our gardens because many of them are beautiful plants.
All on their own. I grow curly thyme as an ornamental plant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. There's a limit to how much you can use to curly thyme.
Yeah. Vanilla. Who doesn't love vanilla icing, especially a butter icing with vanilla? You will see on the slide that the vanilla comes from one of the most beautiful orchids in the world. When the orchid sets seed, forms a seed pod. And that seed pod is what gives us the vanilla extract, that gives us vanilla ice cream, gives us vanilla cake.
It's a taste.
It gives us...
It's actually, isn't it the world's most popular
I think so.
flavoring?
Yeah. Vanilla
Yeah.
scented candles.
Well,
Yum.
it
I think it's
can
a toss up
compete
between
with
chocolate
chocolate
and
anyway. One or the other is
Yeah.
going to be, but I think vanilla beats the
Yeah.
band. Yeah.
Who knew? Did you know that a orchid produces this wonderful thing? We think of orchids as these delicate creatures. Orchids are actually extremely hardy, extremely tough. In their natural habitat, they are survivors.
And you don't need to know this, but it is the biggest plant family in the world. There are more species of orchids than there are of any other type of a plant. So it's kind of interesting.
Bouquet Garni.
Yes, we can do, well, we can't, we haven't got a bay leaf, but but if we did have a bay leaf, we could. You know, you pick a bit of this and you pick a little bit of this. And you have a little bit of parsley, and you tie it all up, which I haven't got a piece of thing, but you tie it up with a bit of thread, and you throw it in with your soups, and with your stews, and with your casseroles of various kinds to add flavour. And that is a French idea. So that is your Bouquet Garni. Excuse my accent.
Okay. Now, aside from, Diana and I are both gardeners. Diana is a master gardener and she is an accredited horticultural judge. I am an accredited design judge. We talk a lot about plants and flowers. Well, you know, there are flowers that can garnish your dining table. There are some beautiful things. A pot marigold is great.
Calendulas,
A
yeah.
calendula, yes. A daylily is wonderful.
Not
Squash
just for
blossoms.
garnishing, but you can put them in batter and eat them.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Squash blossoms, you can deep fry them too.
Yes.
Johnny jump ups, the little violets, they're great. Scarlet runner beans. However, and there is a big however, do not ever use things like digitalis to garnish your food. Don't use clematis. Don't use delphiniums or monkshood. Guess what? They're not good for you in that particular form. Don't use lily of the valley. You can end up with some very nasty stuff.
Yes.
If you're not sure, check the internet. In the old days, the way you found out about what was good for you and what wasn't, you tested it on a servant and let them die. We don't have to do that anymore. Or in some cases, it might have been your mother-in-law. We don't have to do that anymore. We have the internet. So if you're at all in doubt, check. Always, always double check.
Yes. Is this flower edible? Is this flower edible? And it's absolutely amazing at what isn't edible, and that's why you should always check. You know, even things like daffodils are really incredibly poisonous. And we don't even think about that. We sort of think about some other ones that were, you know, we all know about monkswoods, but do we really know about the rest of that buttercup family that monkswoods belong to? And they're all poisonous, all of them. And so, you be very careful.
Who thought your pretty clematis would be not so
double check.
Now, when we get to cooking, by the way, any of the things that we talk about today about preserving or keeping your herbs and spices will be available through the library as a handout. So you don't have to try to remember everything we're going to tell you right now. But I want to talk for a minute about herbed butters. Herbed butters, I'm out of order, but that's okay. Herbed butters just add so much to everything. I use them constantly. I use butter, I don't use margarine. You chop up a little garlic, mix it in, plop a little teaspoonful on top of a steak, on top of corn on the cob, when you're frying some mushrooms. You can add so many things. Making herb butter is incredibly easy. The instructions are in written form, but basically you just soften about half a cup or half a pound of butter, chop up whatever spice you want, mix it all really together, put it between some plastic wrap, roll it into a log, tie the ends, shove it in your freezer. Whenever you want some, you just slice off a piece. It will keep for months and months in your freezer, and it'll keep for weeks and weeks in your fridge. So it's a thing that you can make ahead, and if you happen to have guests, when we get to the point when we can't have guests again, what a nice extra little touch, adding an herbed butter to whatever you're cooking.
And garlic is a herb.
Yep.
We didn't bring any garlic. We should have.
And I have garlic at home.
Yeah, and me too.
If you grow garlic, you see, I can't help myself. If you grow garlic, the garlic scapes, first of all, are edible.
Yes.
Secondly, make the most wonderful addition to bouquets or a flower arrangement. They are just have so much personality that they're fun to use.
Yes.
I harvest them. My cousin grows a whole bunch of garlic. I go every fall and I snip. And sometimes I paint them, and sometimes I don't.
Because it kind of grows squirrely, like a little pig's tail, you know. They're really cute.
Now,
herbal tea, I'm going to leave you to herbal tea. You actually like it, I loathe it, but all tea is herbal. That's the first thing you've got to understand, is all tea is herbal. But there's some that we consider actually don't come from the tea plant that grows in China and India, but have other good things that are healthy and beneficial to you.
Yeah. One of the most popular teas around is Earl Grey. And Earl Grey is flavored with bergamot, which is the rind from a bergamot orange.
Yes, it isn't Monarda.
Two different things.
Two different things. We call Monarda or bee balm. We call that bergamot, all right? But that isn't the bergamot that's used to flavor Earl Grey tea. It's an orange.
Yeah.
It's an orange peel that they use.
And the orange itself is basically inedible. It's really yucky.
Yeah.
But they use the rind and they dry it, and sometimes they use some of the juices or various other flavorings and so on. So be aware that if you happen to know that bergamot is used to flavor your Earl Grey tea, don't go to your garden and pick some of those leaves and shove it in your tea. It's not going to be the same thing at all.
Yeah. Mind you, it won't hurt you, because
No.
that is a plant that is edible.
Yeah. Now, oils and vinegars, they are used to flavor almost everything from desserts to dressings, and they make wonderful gifts.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely
they look
wonderful gifts.
sensational. Preserving your herbs by covering them in oil, or immersing them in oil, or immersing them in vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
You can preserve your herbs, but also you flavor your vinegar. So you do two things. And
Yes,
you
you can
use
do
it for
either.
salads and
Yeah. So if you're going to infuse oil, now herbs infused in oil will last 4 to 6 weeks unless you freeze them, and you can freeze them. You have to collect and thoroughly clean bottles. When you are doing anything in oil, water is your enemy, because a drop of water may contain a bacteria that will spoil what you're doing. So you put your containers through the dishwasher, make sure they're thoroughly dry. You make sure that your herb of choice is perfectly dry, and so you just kind of put it in, fill it with oil. Now you should use a good quality olive oil. This is an oil, no, actually this is vinegar. But this bottle is great, so I'm saving it. You can see there's not much left that my daughter brought me back from Italy. When you're going to do your oil, warm the oil before you use it. Warm it and let it cool. That process does something to the chemical makeup of the oil, which allows things to work. So then when that's cool, you take your herb of choice, put it into the bottle, fill it up with your oil, seal it, put it away somewhere, store it in a cool, dark place, and for a couple of weeks to let the flavor develop, and then open it up and see if it's reached, good old taste test, reach the potency that you would like it to have, and then pretty it up and give it to somebody as a present, or put it on your own shelf and let it look gorgeous. However, this is something I want you to remember. If you infuse garlic in oil, you must store the garlic infused oil in the fridge. It's different if it's in water, but remember, oil goes in the fridge with garlic. The rest of them can be at room temperature. It's just the garlic. And then doing it in vinegar. Want me to talk about? Yeah,
you
talk
do.
about.
You're the one who does these lovely things and wraps them in elaborate raffia bows.
With vinegar, it's mostly the same process. Collect and ensure you have airtight sealed bottles. Put them through the dishwasher. Cleanliness, even pre-COVID days, is always essential. Moisture is your enemy. Ensure that your sprigs of herbs, or even chilies, are clean and dry. If you have to, leave them somewhere to dry, a couple of hours or overnight to make sure. You can even put them in the oven to dry. Nice little warm oven, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So you basically follow the same procedure. You put your herb or your spice into your vinegar, and you add your or into your bottle rather, and then you add your vinegar. Seal it, store it, check it, use it. Nice
Great,
and
yeah,
easy.
beautiful on sides and
No, I
toast
gotta
this
tell
and
you.
that.
Okay, so I have a very tiny garden. Diana has a very large garden. I don't have room to grow all this. However, I can go down to D&G or wherever your local nursery is and get one of each of these things. I mean, look at this oregano. Look at this. I can do for $12, $15, I can do a whole bunch of stuff without having had to grow it myself.
Now
Now,
that they've been cared for, and we'll get on to that.
remember I said when you do garlic and oil, must be in the fridge. When you do garlic and vinegar, it can be at room temperature. So that is important to remember. Herbs for scent. Diana alluded to it earlier, and
Yeah, I mean,
there are potpourris.
yeah, potpourri and the stirring herbs and so on, but the potpourri, I guess, is the one that we know today rather than the stirring herbs. But basically anything from lavender, and a whole load of all of the scented, all of this beautiful scented herbs that you can have. Rose petals, petals of any scented flower are great in potpourri, but also a group of things that I had never really thought about, such as orange rind and lemon rind, and it can be sort of scraped off and used in potpourri. And nowadays, because they want the smell to last longer, people are actually using the essences, the flower essences that will sort of get to enhance and pep up if you've got some potpourri that's no longer smelling. But you can use spices in them like cloves, cinnamon sticks, all sorts of things, and it smells great.
It does.
Yeah, it does. And even things like using your lavender bags, in amongst your underwear and that kind of thing is great.
Diana, you
Well,
want to
and herbs for perfume. And here's can be a shocker, because they've been used for millennia. I mean, you're finding flowers that were used for perfume in King Tut's tombs and things like that. So they've always been used for that. And they're usually sort of distilled into essential oils. And one of the main things is if you go in on the internet, you will see the rose fields of Kazakhstan, where they grow the old Gallica roses, which are heavily perfumed, but only flower once. And they're literally just mile after mile of roses in bloom. All of it to be distilled down to make your essential rose oil. It is, all right, so it takes 10,000 pounds of rose petals to distill 1 pound of rose oil. So an incredible sort of reduction. And even worse than that, and this is one that people don't realize, is that one of the most expensive perfume ingredients is orris root. Now, orris root is iris root. So your big Germanic irises that we have all over the place, before you go run out and start thinking you're going to make a fortune out of iris roots, it's what is it?
It's 1 ton of iris rhizomes that you have to age for 2 to 5 years, And it might produce, if you're lucky, about 4.5 pounds
of essential
of
oil.
essential oil.
And
That's a lot of iris roots.
Yes.
Herbs used decoratively.
Here's our expert on that.
There are several slides there. The bouquet that was made for the Queen on the anniversary of her Jubilee contained herbs. Herbs can be used beautifully in any sort of floral arrangement, any sort of bouquet that you put together. Anytime you go out and pick things from your garden, if you just look at this leaf form, you know, if that were in water, you know how pretty. And then a lovely little flower here. Don't forget to look outside of what you normally think about doing when you're using herbs for decorative purposes. They can be a lot of fun. Look at the form of this. Look at these beautiful leaves. You can do all sorts of things, so don't be afraid to go out and experiment and try. Now, I have to tell you about symbolism of herbs. Back in the 17th and 18th century, the French codified just about everything. They gave every flower and every herb and every spice a meaning all of its own. The difficulty came when different cultures assigned different meanings to different things. However, the French system is still probably the one that is most widely used. There are volumes and volumes and volumes that you can find on the language of flowers, and that's what it is called. It's called the language of flowers. So, for example, rosemary.
Always for remembrance.
Rosemary for remembrance. How can you not remember that? Basil. Give you that. I mean, look. Oh my God, that smells wonderful. Depending on where you are, basil means best wishes. It means sacred. Means fertility. Means happiness. Means hatred. So if you're going to send somebody a message, I can't imagine anybody doing this anymore, but you know, it's fun to think about. You have to make sure that they understand the same language as you. Parsley, for example, is friendship and festive. Poppy is sleepiness and forgetfulness. So it's fun if you have nothing to do on a cold winter's night, because cold winter nights are coming, guys. Look up some of the meaning of herbs and flowers, because they can be fun. Garlic. Garlic is for, I know what garlic is for. It's for strength and protection. There's a list, and it's only a partial list, but you know what? It might be on your screen at some point. So it's fun to look up the meaning of herbs and spices. And for softies such as me, sometimes when I'm doing things like that, it kind of gives me an extra little bit of fun when I'm cooking.
And although we can't grow it in this country, from Queen Victoria and every royal bride and most of the brides in the UK ever since have a sprig of myrtle in their wedding bouquets. Now we can't grow myrtle, so so we can't partake of that. But my sister certainly has a myrtle bush, and just about every other bride will try and strike. When they say strike, it means they root the sprig of myrtle that was in their wedding bouquets. So all sorts of interesting things get ascribed to favorite herbs.
Yes. Now, when you're growing your herbs,
Yes.
most gardeners tend to want to be really nice to them. Do you have to
yes.
be nice to your herbs?
Well, most of our favorite herbs, the ones with the most powerful scents, the lavenders and the rosemaries and everything, they come from Mediterranean countries, right? So that's where you're looking at, and what they need, and you can tell any plant that has small leaves that are either waxy or, in this case, covered by a kind of thin wax that gives its kind of silvery color. So anytime you've got a plant that is got small silvery leaves, you know it needs 100% sun. This is not a plant that you can possibly grow in the shade. And that applies to nearly all herbs. There are very few herbs that will grow in the shade. So you'd be better off to grow them in a pot rather than, out on your front doorstep than you would put it under a tree or in a shady spot on the north side of the house. So hot and dry. They come from very well drained. And if you think of that thing about Mediterranean climates, warm, wet, westerly winds in winter, hot, dry summers, they can go months without rain and very intense temperatures. And those condense the flavor and aromas in your thing. So that this, which is my lavender, is this year loved it. This very hot summer is just up their street. They absolutely adore that kind of weather. Don't be too kind to them. Do not fertilize them. They don't need fertilizing. They like poor soil. You get a better flavor on if you grow them what we would say as gardeners, you grow them hard. You don't baby them. You don't pamper them. You make sure that if they are growing in a pot, that pot almost dries completely out before you water it again. And so you're not watering it very often. You're definitely not fertilizing them. Don't fertilize them because they grow all soft and mushy. They're not designed. Most of them are not designed for that kind of pampering. You might get away with a bit of pampering on things like your mints, but you don't want to pamper mint. Mints have, I like to say, beware the squares. Have you heard that saying? All right. If you feel the stem of a mint plant, it is square. And that means that this is a rampaging plant. Left to its own devices, it will take over the world. It will certainly take over the best part of your vegetable garden. So if you're growing mints, you grow them somewhere where they can be contained and not spread. I've got to tell you, I'm very good at killing mint. It took I actually managed to kill it, and said, "You didn't manage to kill mint." I said, "I did." You can almost be proud of it, but it does. It's a highly successful plant, and so you grow it contained in buckets or bushel baskets, or some large container is where you're best off with mint. And as I said, these the subshrub, these ones that we're talking about, come from the Mediterranean area. This, and this. They are in actual fact not a herbal plant. They are a shrub. They're a miniature kind of what we call sub-shrubs. And you can tell they're woody. They're woody at the bottom. And there's oregano. Have you got oregano? Same thing, sub-shrub. It's woody at the base. And so is the lavender, so is the rosemary here. And there's hyssop, lavender, thyme, winter savory, rosemary, bay is of course a tree. And we can't grow it outside here. My mum had an avenue of bay trees. She kept breaking bits off and striking them, you know, rooting them all along the pathway. So bay is something we had a lot of, but it won't go through a winter here. But you can bring it indoors and treat it like an indoor plant, the same as you would a hibiscus or something like that, and continue to pinch the leaves off of it every so often. There's the annual herbs, and the basil, or at least it is in our climate, is an annual herb, which means we will go from a seed in the spring to a plant like this, to it absolutely dying, going to seed. It will go to flower, and it will elongate, go to flower, set seed, and then it's toast, and all in 1 year, in one season. So that's that one. Dill.
Oh, sorry.
Dill isn't. Well, it's a like Queen Anne's lace. It's an umbellifer. It's a plant, and beautiful. You know, and not only that, but a host to the eastern black swallowtail butterfly. So even if you're not using it to make pickles with, you can use it to enchant and cuddle, you know, mollycoddle along a nice eastern black swallowtail. Okay. And we've talked about the perennial herbs. They live for 2 or more years. That's all of these here. Not this. Rosemary isn't going to be of use to you. Lavender will go through our winter. But I guarantee you, by the spring, you all think it's dead. Dead as a doornail. You don't touch it. You do not cut it back in the spring when you're cleaning up your garden, and you wait. You wait to see where it is alive, and you will begin to see the growth appear on it. Then you can cut it back. If you cut it back before, it goes into shock, and it's like self-fulfilling. If it wasn't dead before it is by the time you cut it back, you know. So cut back your lavender late. Your rosemary will have to come indoors for the winter. It will not survive outside. And you can grow your herbs in containers indoors. And we were talking about this. The real secret of growing herbs in containers indoors is light. And you can try for a sunny windowsill, and yeah, you'll get it. They'll go leggy, you know. And again, don't water them too much while they're going through that, because they sort of go dormant. But under these new LED lights, you can grow incredible. Yeah, you want to tackle harvesting?
Sure. When you harvest your leaves, you keep picking them all year long, even if you can't use them, because if you allow things to bolt, they're going to not be so good. So always pinch back. Yeah. Always pinch back, and that encourages more growth.
Because when they go to flower, you lose the flavor too.
Yes. Yes.
They go bitter.
So keep harvesting, even if you can't use it, give it to somebody. Or put it in the compost. Now,
or make a herb vinegar.
Yes. Air drying is probably the simplest way to dry herbs.
Yes.
Diana?
I have it. Okay, I grabbed these this morning. And basically you're going to hang these upside down in a cool, dry space. And garages are marvelous for this. And so basically, I get an elastic band, and I'll tell you why you can use raffia or anything else to sort of tie them up. But I use an elastic band because it shrinks as these kind of shrink, so does your elastic band. So they remain kind of tight. And then you can hang them.
Here, I'll hold.
There you are. You could do the same with your lavenders. You can just carry on. And this enables you might have in your garage, you might have some hooks and you know nails and other things you can string across. But this is a nice, easy way of accommodating a number of. There you go, and just until it dries.
So when you do this, you put it in a dry, well-ventilated place, and leave it to dry until it's crumbly,
Yes.
which can take, depending on what it is, anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. And then put it into a clean container, and it'll keep for a good year. Good year. Now, you can also dry them in the oven. What you do is, it's faster than the air drying method, and it's a good option if your conditions are on the humid side. So you spread your herbs on a baking sheet, on a piece of parchment paper, the leaf.
Yeah, like this. On a baking sheet.
Yeah.
You just keep
Keep going. 150 degree oven. The door propped open a little bit. And then check them frequently.
Yeah.
Make when they are crumbly, that's when you take them out. It could take between 1 to 4 hours, depending on the herb. Remember I said earlier about water being your enemy in many cases? Make sure these are dry, because if they're not dry, what you're going to do is cook them instead of dry them.
Yes.
So, many people will say make sure they're dry, but if they don't tell you why to make sure they're dry, that's why. Same as if you happen to do these in a microwave, which you can, make sure that they're dry, so that you don't cook, you dry.
Yeah.
Now, you can freeze, but there are differences. Good old ice cube trays. You can freeze things in oil, you can freeze things in broth, you can freeze things in water. But be aware that soft things like parsley, like basil, don't do well if frozen in water. They're better frozen in broth or oil. The harder herbs can be frozen in anything. What do? You take your herb, you put it, pack it in. I would say maybe half to 3/4 full. Add your water, your broth, your oil, whichever. Don't come right to the top, because liquids expand as they freeze. Let them freeze, pop them out, put them in a bag, and use them as you need them. You thought this was going to be some long, drawn-out, complicated affair. It's not. It's quite easy to do. They will store in your freezer for a good 3 months. And if you happen to be growing a couple of pots on your windowsill, you can always refresh and make yourself a few more. So freezing is really the best option for leafy herbs such as basil and cilantro and parsley, tarragon. Store, freeze, use. I mentioned earlier that things that are soft should be done in, oh dear, I said it wrong. Soft leafy herbs do better in water, not oil. So soft leafy herbs such as basil, mint, dill, parsley. Herbs that do well in olive oil are things like your oreganos and rosemary and
Your
sage,
Mediterranean
thyme.
herbs.
Yeah. So be aware and remember there is going to be information available for you here. Diana and I have handouts for you which Vicki and Danielle and their crew will make sure are available to you. Now, is it an
Herb.
or is it a
Herb.
Both are correct. The French tend not to pronounce the H because they use the old French word herb, but the English-speaking countries do. And who cares?
Yes.
The upshot is these are wonderful things to use. They add such a wonderful touch to your cooking, and they're fun to do, they're fun to make as gifts. And Diana and I want to thank you and thank the library for giving us this opportunity
Yes.
to tell you a bit about herbs.
One of our favorite subjects.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lil and Diana, for a wonderful presentation on herbs and the use of, and lots of other fun facts that we didn't know about. As mentioned, we do have handouts available, so you're able to stop in the library and ask for a handout, or you can email us at askus@haltonhills.ca and we can make sure to send one out to you. Thank you very much.